Welcome to another edition of Dr. the Doctor in the Chat Room. I am your host, Dr. Rhonda Shaw, and I am here with my good friend, Mr. Leon Gray. He is Special Assistant to Judge Dan Michael with the Shelby County Juvenile Court System. And he's going to tell you a little bit more about himself and his background in a moment. Today, we're going to have some discussion surrounding trauma-informed education, and we're just going to talk about trauma and children that have experienced trauma, because we know that children that experience trauma it has a direct impact on how they learn. It has a direct impact on other aspects of their lives, and we want to talk about it and some tips, hopefully, for how we can navigate through these issues. How are you, friend?
Dr. Shaw, I'm really good. And how are you doing this fine day?
I'm doing great. I'm so glad you came back to be with me. I can always depend on the golden voice. You've got the
Oh,
golden voice.
here we go. I've never done, except for Sunday school, I've never done Zoom as an interview or anything before. However, we are using this same resource right here to do some of our hearings downstairs in some of the courtrooms
Hmm.
because of COVID-19. So the kids can be in one room with their camera and the lawyer right next to them in another room, and then the
Hmm.
judge is in another room with the
Yeah,
prosecutor.
yeah,
These things are these new platforms on the internet are coming in handy.
yeah.
Special assistant to the judge means a lot. I actually have five categories underneath me. I am the administrator for the volunteer services group. We have a lot of volunteers throughout the courthouse who do a lot of different things, and we appreciate our volunteers. We can always use more. We'll talk about that later at the end of the show if you'll let me.
Okay.
I also do the auxiliary probation officers. I am their administrator as well. We have lots of children who commit some delinquent acts that are not nearly violent enough or serious enough for them to have to be in our detention center, but they do have to adhere to some of the probation rules. So we have
Mhm.
several probation officers that look after our kids to keep them on the right path after they touch here. I am the media advisor, the speech writer. I get coffee and sweep the floor sometimes. So if you come to this building, generally you're gonna see me doing something around here.
Yeah. So just a quick fact as we go into talking about just maybe coming up with a concrete definition for what trauma is, what it looks like. I'm just going to give a quick fact here that one half to two-thirds of children actually experience trauma. And in light of COVID-19, we figure that these numbers are going to go up because, whereas children are being traumatized in many ways, but yet they have the outlet of going to school and having time with their teachers and all of that. Now, some of these kids are actually at home with people that are traumatizing them. They're at home with people that are abusing them. So for some of us that are complaining about boredom and not having a whole lot to do and not being able to get out, it doesn't even compare to what we know some populations are experiencing during this pandemic.
Agreed with you totally. There are several more defined, more well articulated, if you will, definitions of trauma. When I do my public speaking, I narrow it down to a simple area. It is an adverse experience, either physical or verbal, that affects a child or an adult in a way that lasts beyond the moment of its occurrence. So that's pretty much where I go with it. I think I can understand it. Trauma can happen. I'm in stores sometimes, so are you, and you'll see a mother grab a child and shake that child. That's traumatic.
Yes.
That's traumatic. I work at juvenile court. Uh, Kids get out of the back of squad cars with handcuffs on to be brought here because they were picked up for this or that, or
Mhm.
at least suspicion of it. That's trauma. Getting handcuffs placed on your wrists, behind your back, and riding in a police car and not knowing what the future is going to be after you get out of it. Those are traumatic things. Trauma can be something as simple though as being afraid of. I know a lot of our younger children who are not exposed to pets are afraid of dogs and afraid of animals. And if you're a small child and the dog gets close enough to you to bark or snap at you, that can be trauma. So there are many levels of it, and it's how we deal with it. And with the children who have experienced those traumatic acts and traumatic events and episodes, how we deal with them after the fact determines how we can help them best to get over that trauma occurring in their lives.
Yeah, so I mean, we really need to adopt trauma-informed approaches for dealing with these children because it's certainly going to have a bearing on how they do move forward. So, what would you say schools should do in terms of are they should they be the sanctuary where families and children should be able to find a staff where knowledge and understanding who respond compassionately and offer what is needed and help to guide to a path of healing or through a path of healing?
I think schools absolutely play a role. A lot of people uh, think they should play even a bigger role in the child's life than they're playing now. I'll put it this way. For 7.5 to 8.5, and if kids are into extracurricular activities, sometimes 10, 12 hours a day, your child's at school.
Mm-hmm.
He's around adults who are professionals at education. And whether it be after school drama or athletics or whatever it is, that's still a paid professional in most cases. So with that much time being spent at school, the professionals, the teachers, the administrators, and others at school should be able to spot when something, as we say around here, just not quite right about that child right now. And children won't always let you know. Children talk when you don't want them to, but when you sit them down and look them in the face and say, okay, now what's wrong? You're not always going to get the feedback you want from that child. So we have to be able to evaluate what's going on with the child. As you well know, Dr. Shaw, we have a test called the ACEs test. 10 questions that have been put together by think tanks along this subject for many years, and they tweak them and do what they will with them. But the test asks some very poignant questions that children only have to say yes or no to. And generally, we can get a yes or no answer out of a child. And if we get more than a certain number of yeses, depending on the test, then we know that child's got some things going on in his or her life that have been traumatic, and that we need to deal with this child as one who has got some adverse childhood experiences in their history, and that who we need to deal with going forward in the future in ways to try and mitigate what's happened in the past, and definitely try and stop these things from happening in the future in their lives and not add to those things. You know, doctors have a Hippocratic oath that phase one is, or rule one is, do no harm. So
Yeah.
the first thing is harm a kid. We don't want to yell at a kid that's been yelled at all its life. So,
This thought just came to mind. How many parents, and I'm not really looking for a number, but do you think that there are many parents that are traumatizing their children and really don't even think? I mean, I'll take our generation for example. We came up during the spanking phase. Go get the switch and whatever else.
you're traumatizing me, Doc. You're traumatizing me. Ow!
Do you think that is the case? And how do we get these parents, do you think, to see themselves and to um I have this motto: learn, unlearn, relearn, to unlearn some
I
things.
get it.
Yeah.
I think the biggest challenge for intervening in a parent's life who's already parenting is to win their trust and let them understand that we really are on their side first and foremost, not trying to, because parents can be offended, and the snapback is always, so you're going to tell me how to raise my child. Well, that's not what we're telling them. In the essence, we're telling them how to better attempt to raise their child, or how to get better results from their parenting skills. Parenting skills and teaching after the fact, as your motto just suggested, means you got to unteach some stuff, and it's much more difficult to unteach bad behavior. So getting parents in when their babies are infants, especially very young parents, for which we have many in our society now, and getting them into a curriculum, if you will, that shows scenario by scenario, case by case, ways to deal with little problems and not make them big problems. We tend as parents, and I got 4 boys, about to kick them out of my house because they've been in there too long. Well, 2 are already adults, but I have a kid that has to be in my home because colleges are closed, and I have a high school senior who's pouting about whether or not he's going to have a graduation. I've got to balance those 2 things, but I got to understand that those kids have feelings, and as big as they are, those feelings are real. Especially, I can't imagine, Dr. Shaw, about not having a graduation. I've been out of school 43 years, out of high school 43 years. I can't imagine it, having to face not being able to walk across that stage and get that diploma. That's a rite of passage. So when Jordan, my youngest name is Jordan, when he talks about that being serious to him, I need to listen. One of the easiest ways to understand our children is to listen to them. But we've got to be prepared to be parents in order to want to listen to them. And a lot of parents would rather sit you in the corner with a cell phone and a game or whatever, and be peaceful than to listen to what's really going on. And we've got to reteach that behavior.
Yeah, because I think many of these parents that we're speaking of have unaddressed ACEs themselves.
Themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. So I recently read an article that said the brain was built for survival. If that's so, how do you believe trauma interrupts the way the brain works?
Oh, that's a very good question. You and I have a lot of the same background as far as children are concerned. And what we talk about here in the court more often than not is when we encounter children whose brains have hormones that have gone from the normal function and flow to defending themselves. And those of us who work in this field know that sends them into fight or flight mode. That's the brain telling them which way to go. Do I run away from what I'm facing, or do I face it and try and defeat it physically? And quite honestly, neither is appropriate. But from a small child, that brain has been traumatized, and it has developed the most efficient ways to deal with what they're being traumatized by. Seeing a person run away, the Bible tells us to flee from sin. So fleeing is not a new thing. Uh, but to see a child have to have a choice of only 2 in an instant, make that choice. Is this thing going to hurt me or not? And can I hurt it before it hurts me? And so the brain, that's your central nervous system from the time you're born. And it's a sponge, and it soaks up and records the good outcomes and the bad outcomes. And it's going to tend to lean towards doing what gets the better outcomes more often than not. Brain science is real.
Yes. In light of COVID-19, do you believe that trauma informed practices for how we teach kids and all of that, do you believe these practices can transfer into online learning?
This online learning uh, trial period that we're in now is one of the greatest introductions to something. We were forced to do it, but it's one of the greatest introductions to technology that I've seen in my lifetime. And I'm 61 years old. I've never seen as many people. The number of new seniors joining Facebook so they can be in a community is huge. The number of seniors having people learning how to turn their computer on to watch their church service on the computer on Sunday is huge. So what our public schools have to do, what our colleges are already doing, what our private schools have to do is understand that uh, we are the future. The future is now, and this may be a transition that increases the desire to learn. I always try to look at the glass as half full. We may have kids that get up in the morning and run to this laptop or run to that desktop and go, "Hey, I'm here. Let's go to whatever. I'm here for this class." I've watched my kids at home, both at the college level and high school level, doing it and not griping about it. So yeah, I feel that what this is the future, and we can use this to teach anything. This is television. Come on, let's be honest with each other, Dr. Shaw. I'm looking at you on TV, and you're looking at me on television, and we're miles from one another, but we are together. So what we have to be able to do is not let this stop where it is with education. This needs to be economically too. You can't price this out of every kid's range, but this has to be put into every kid's hands with a smartphone, at least, with the ability for teachers to touch kids whenever they need to touch, and back, and vice versa, and vice versa.
Yeah, I read a quote, and I don't want to take credit for this, but I can't remember. I posted it on Facebook the other day where someone was saying, someone in mental health, I think, was saying, you know, it should not have been labeled social distancing. It should have been labeled physical distancing, because actually, we can stay connected. We can stay connected, even probably better and more so now. I mean, I'm connected to people that maybe I wouldn't normally connect with so
Absolutely.
much. Yeah. Um,
Absolutely.
so, do you think there's a difference between trauma informed schools versus trauma sensitive schools? If so, how? What would that difference be?
Well, they should all be trauma informed. We are the country's model court, juvenile court, for being trauma informed. So I think if we are, then all schools should be. And being trauma informed is simply being focused enough, having your staff trained to be focused enough to understand children that have come in contact with adverse childhood experiences and thus have had traumatic things change the way they function. So uh, once we can recognize it, and that's the first thing. When you go to the doctor and you tell the doctor you hurt, uh, he may want to know where you're hurting, one, but he's going to want to know why you're hurting in order to be able to stop that permanently. So we have to be the same, have the same emphasis when it comes to dealing with our children. We want to, if there's something wrong, we want to know what it is, if it can be articulated by them. But more than that, we need to dig a little deeper, peel another layer off that onion, and find out why that is. Are they getting 3 meals a day? Are they eating breakfast? Do they have clean clothes to wear to school all the time? Is our mom and dad fighting? Uh, there are any number of things that could be going on when children are away from school that make them not able to function the way we'd like them to when they come to school. So, yes, indeed, being trauma informed. Then we call it our next level after trauma informed is trauma responsive. When I identify a child has some traumatic experiences going on, how do we respond to that? Well, obviously, a child is being, or should be being, taken care of by somebody, a parent, a guardian. So the next level of conversation needs to go on after we've identified it with the person in charge of keeping a safe environment for that child. It is very unfortunate for a lot of our children that the safe environment varies so wide. It, you talk to one kid about what the requirements are in their mind for having a safe home, and being comfortable at home, and is your room nice, and all of those things, and they'll give you one set of answers, and you talk to 10 other kids and you might get 10 other answers. So it is a socio-economic problem, obviously, but more than just that, the basics are not always seen as just that, the basics. So we've got to raise a bar to raise the standard so that the basics are the same for all of our children. Once we're there, then we can start to try and fix things that are subpar.
Mhm.
Anything that's not, because we know where to focus our attention. But we've got to have a hard line for this is the absolute bottom level that a child should be living in their home if it's to be called a safe and adequate home.
Yeah, I see trauma informed as just the knowledge, itself, and then the trauma sensitive is the doing. You are informed on what trauma looks like, but are you putting strategies in place and implementing services and implementing that type of teaching and those learning environments, being sensitive to what trauma, really is. So we're going to keep talking about trauma informed education. We're going to take a break and we will be right back on 94.7 FM. I am still here with my friend, Mr. Leon Gray from Shelby County Juvenile Court, and we are still talking about trauma informed education. We talked a little bit off air about discipline and consequences and how they have a really big impact on kids with ACEs. What forms of discipline or what people may consider discipline are having these big impacts on children that have been traumatized?
Great question, Dr. Stewart. I called you Dr. Stewart, Dr. Shaw,
I'm
and tell Dr. Stewart I
I'm
said
honored.
hi. Maybe she's listening. But Dr. Shaw, I'm serious. A lot of people might think that I will go straight to whipping and belts and extension cords and all and sticks and all this, these old things, switches. Uh, Believe it or not, the modern day discipline, and I hear it from parents and kids in counseling meetings all the time. The modern day discipline has gone to a physicality that is nothing short of fighting. Laying hands on your child with your fists and things of that nature. And you and I both know that is really pushing the envelope past where it was ever intended to go. Uh, so we want to make sure that any physicality is thought out in away from the actual action that the kid may have been involved with that made discipline seem necessary in the first place. So we want to back away and have a breath or two, a cup of coffee, a Coke, a glass of water, some peace time so that we can think this thing out before we go into the discipline mode. We don't ever want to discipline a child angry.
Mm.
That's first and foremost. That's first and foremost. Secondly, we don't want to do something that a lot of our parents do with our older kids, our teenagers, 15 and ups. They tend to think that it's now time to put the fear of the police, the fear of law enforcement in that child by even saying out verbally, if you don't obey me, I'm going to call the police and have them take you down to the juvenile court because I can't do anything with you. Maybe they can. That's not discipline. First and foremost, that's a crime called false reporting. If you're going to call the police and you're an adult, if you're not reporting a crime, then what are you reporting? You're reporting something false because you're going to tell that police officer that answered that phone, that dispatcher, something to make them come to your house. It's not going to be the truth. Simply not going to be the truth. So what we want to do is make folks realize that scaring your child, your teenage child, with the threat of the police and incarceration is also not a form of discipline that's acceptable. It's the most unacceptable form. Some forms of discipline that are acceptable that will work are depriving children of things that they like. I put cell phone and computer and iPad at the top of that list. If you take away their communication electronics, you get a child's attention. By the same token, you don't want to give them that thing too early in life. A lot of kids get those things at 7 and 8 years old, and well, once the internet gets them, getting them back is very difficult. Once the internet gets your child, getting them back, and especially if he or she has an unrestricted uh, pathway, you don't put any restrictions on the phone or the electronic device, and they can just go where they want to on the internet. They go to some of the worst places, and there is an age appropriate learning curve that we must adhere to for our kids. If our kids shouldn't know this, if they're not adults, we shouldn't be showing them adult content. Period. End of story. But compromising with things in the home, physical violence, physical hitting, and this is Leon. This is the gospel according to Leon Gray. After a kid is about 7 years old, hitting is about over. Hitting is something that you do with little children, and hitting them once with your hand, on their hand, that's to get their attention. It's to startle them at a moment that you want to verbalize something about their behavior that needs changing. You don't, if you haven't done that, telling Junior at 15 to go cut you a switch is not disciplining at all. That's no, and how that gets to trauma is back to fight or flight. If all you have in your arsenal to discipline for your child is some type of hitting or physical contact with your child that's going to cause pain, then eventually a child's going to get about your size. Both of mine now in my house are bigger than me. I would hurt my hand trying to hit either of my children. They work out, so I'm not going there. But the way to discipline is to listen to what they're doing and make them listen. Respect is the first form of discipline. When I'm talking, you listen to me. When you talk, I'll listen to you. And then we'll work this out. Now, there are reward systems. We use this in the detention center. Good behavior should be rewarded. Even when I was a kid, back in the Flintstone days, when the good behavior gets some sort of reward. So kids are people too. You can't just tell them when they're doing bad. You got to verbally reward them when they're doing well, and then you may want to add another incentive to that verbal acknowledgement of them doing well. Discipline is another one of those things that you learn on the fly. But if you're doing it like mom and dad did it for you, and you were someone that was traumatized, chances are you're going to traumatize your own children, and it's unfortunate.
That's so in the school system now we have something called PBIS, positive behavioral
Mm-hmm.
instructional supports. Um, the whole focus is social and emotional learning. And I think that's a good thing. But going forward, how important do you think it is the trauma informed education piece is going to be, and how do you think trauma and the PBIS actually? How do you think they work together?
I think they would be uh, supports that held each other up if they're used effectively. We have to have a lot more patience with our children than I think we're having. Uh, and I'm a parent. You're a parent, so we have to be able to figure when we're being uh, not told the truth all the time because it got me out of something the first time. So when we get to those places where we know we're just being kidded around just to be manipulated around, then we stop it. But when there's a serious, and this is for my teachers and my administrators, when there's something serious enough to be told to you by a child, you should take that serious enough to listen to what they're saying. And then that's step one. I got to listen to what that child's saying. Step two is I've got to follow up. I don't want to just verify whether it's the truth. I do, but that's not why I'm following up. If it is the truth, then finding that out leads me to other steps. there are resource guides, and I meant to have a visual aid for you. So we're gonna call this my resource. There's about a 20-page resources guide that we have where we recommend families going through certain problems to these resources to deal with. Uh, Unfortunately, and we're both African American. Unfortunately, African Americans are the last people that seek help with mental illness. It's unfortunate. It's true. So we definitely need to be as serious about the brain and how it's functioning in our children as we are about any other organ in our children. And if something, and we just don't want to pump them up with Ritalin and those other ADD and ADHD drugs just to have them sit down like mummies in the corner. We don't want to do that either. Over medicating is just as bad as not medicating at all. But we don't want to medicate if we don't have to medicate. And Dr. Shaw, I tell you, I am very mindful of checking the stats on the number of kids that we see who are on some kind of doctor prescription medication for one of those alphabet soups. It's discouraging sometimes. And once you start taking drugs, as you well know, you can become addicted. You can become any kind of drug you're taking every day is going to be something you become dependent on. And we don't want that for our children if we can prevent it at all.
You know, having said that, I think about back to when my son was, I want to say maybe middle school, first year in high school, being diagnosed with ADHD. And, a single mom, they're, take him to the teachers are saying, take him to the doctor because I guess he was probably maybe getting on their nerves a little bit.
Yeah.
He's a very quiet young man, but he's a very active young
Mm-hmm.
man. Now, he ended up in sports. He's a musician. Drums was his first instrument. You know, but I remember when they prescribed him something, and maybe after I'm going to say maybe 1 or 2 days of
Mm-hmm.
taking something, I said, like, "Where's my son?"
Who
Like,
is that?
yes, got totally did away with the medication. Now, I said all of that to say this. I was an educator. I feel I'll always be an educator, but I mean at that time though, I was actually working in the school system in the classrooms. And I said, no, I'm going to do my research and I'm going to figure out. So I was becoming informed, okay, on not only on ADHD, but looking for other ways that he could be successful in the classroom and it not be such a burden on him or the teacher. That's when I learned about the 504 plan. I learned, this is, I did my homework and I found a way to get him through that, and I still was able to hold on to my son and not just like you say, this zombie or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's really important that, you don't start them on, I'm
Very
going
important.
to use the word drugs, early. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Let's talk about short-term and long-term effects of trauma on children, because I think, and I'm sure overall, but just in thinking of our culture again, you had brought up like in our culture just a moment ago, there are so many things that we don't or we haven't perceived as traumatizing, right? And those things may have more of a short-term effect in one regard, but as you mentioned, they can kind of spill over into I end up doing that with my children because that's the way it
It
was done.
becomes generational.
Hmm.
And we have so many generational ills that we're already passing along with. Uh, I'll go ahead and open my dirty closet. I had a parent that smoked. I couldn't wait to smoke a cigarette. But keep in mind, I'm 61 years old. They used to advertise cigarettes on TV when I was a kid.
Hmm.
Before the surgeons general did what they did and the government did what they did to regulate tobacco. But the point's still the same. A child is a sponge, and a child looks up to the adult figures that he's around, she's around the most, and they tend to want to do what those adult figures do. So we start generational curses with our children by giving them bad habits because we refuse not to do those things in front of our children. I tell you, the biggest generational habit that has come to fruition now, and as soon as I say it, you'll know it: the use of profanity. I remember a time when a child, I would, if I'd have rather dropped my popsicle than said a cuss word in front of an adult when I was a kid. But
Yes.
now kids talk around me, and when I say kids, 15, 14, 13 year talk around me, not in this building, but in my neighborhood and in stores around, stores where I may be, like they're my age. The F-bomb is nothing. Uh, and they don't, if we did that 50 years ago, then I'd have to look up and turn red and apologize and beg them not to go tell mom and dad. But now everybody, it's the vernacular. It's part of the hip talk. It's the jargon. It needs to stop. It needs to stop. Children are too comfortable being adults too soon, and profanity is a gateway to that. Drinking is a gateway to that. So things that adults do that are adult things, we shouldn't have adults be doing those things around our small children, let alone tolerating our children doing those things around us. That's another problem that we have, Dr. Shaw. I sit in courtrooms all the time, and the testimony will come out. Well, where did you learn how to do that? My dad does it. My mom does it. They let me do it. So we've got to be better stewards of our future. I mean, we brought these children here. Uh, we've got to raise them to be the most productive adults they can be, but they've got to be children first. And I think that's another major thing about trauma in our schools, is the fact that we have older children in households taking care of all of their younger kids before they are able to get themselves dressed and leave and go to 8th grade. They've changed and fed 2 little brothers or a sister. It's not uncommon. I understand, again, the socioeconomic impact of this all. I understand that poor people do the best they can what they got. I got it. But we've got to do better. The bar's got to be raised.
Yeah, and then you have the long term impact of, molestation, um,
Ooh,
all of these things that are and on many of my other shows, we've talked about things like this are just in this that are just swept under the rug, and people address don't address these, mental illness and getting help is so taboo, and so people live with these things, and so many times what we see, the things that we see people doing, the way that we see people are, we wrestle not.
yeah, with flesh and blood,
You
but
know,
with
what
principalities, yeah,
yeah, so what we see and what is actually what is, right? And so that's
absolutely.
why we've begun to ask these questions about, not what's wrong with you and what happened to you, because so much is happening to our children. And I so wish it could stop. I so wish it could stop. I really do. And I know that, we're having one conversation at a time, one intervention at a time. And I just pray to God that, eventually things get better and that these numbers start to look better and that life starts to look better for our youth.
Absolutely. To that point, I heard you talk about molestation. I have to let the listeners and the viewers know that it is about 27% of our caseload has a sexual molestation component to it, uh, generally in the household, uh, and unrelated siblings. And when I say unrelated siblings, blended families with children of the same age. Unfortunately, there are some take advantage of the younger children in the home. And let's go back to that uncensored internet that's on that cell phone. When a child sees something that is not explained to them appropriately, and what they're viewing is not age appropriate for them to be viewing without the explanation, then what we get, unfortunately, are children attempting to do what they saw. And uh, it is the parent, it is one or the other parent in that house that ends up calling law enforcement to get that child out of that house for having molested one of the other children. So we've got to be more hands, and I said that's about 27% of our caseload. We've got to be more honest with ourselves about what parenting is. Uh, it is a full-time job. I have this conversation in my counseling session all the time. It is a full-time job. And if you're going to take time off, you need somebody that's also an adult, ready, that you trust, that your kids trust, that's ready to step in and give you a day off. You just can't say, y'all watch yourselves. I'm going to a movie. It doesn't work that way. It's a full-time job. And even after they get 21, it's a full-time job. This is, I know they're grown then, but still, being a parent does not stop. Just doesn't.
And so you're not into the choir with me. Like
Yes, I do. You have adult children. I know.
Yeah, it does not stop. And the other thing is when you talk about you can't just have them watch themselves, sometimes you wonder if that's the safest way. Because when you say, leave them with somebody you can trust. Nowadays, we
That's not always the case.
it's so difficult to figure out just who that is. All right, Leon, we're going to go to another break and we're going to come back in a moment and we're going to continue to have these discussions about trauma informed education. We will be right back on 94.7 FM, The Gospel Giant. We are back on 94.7 FM. We're talking about children and trauma informed education. Leon, how do you think what would we do? What kinds of things can we do to avoid re traumatizing kids, whether in the classroom or in general?
Let's start within the classroom.
Okay.
First and foremost, there's a word that children are saying now that I haven't heard them say as often in my life, and that is a term rather. I'm under a lot of pressure, and that's just not something I heard children say when I was growing up, or when I had my first generation of kids. Nowadays, you hear kids talking about, and they're talking about it to one another, about the number. I got this to do. I got that to do. One of the biggest traumas that we can avoid having our kids suffer is loading their plates too full to set them up to fail. Uh, because children don't want to fail, and they definitely don't want their peers to see them fail. So if we keep, and this is something parents have got to watch, just because your child is a certain age does not mean they have to be in a certain grade. It would be nice if one size fit all, that everybody started first grade at 5 years old or 6. That'd be wonderful. It's not so. It's not so. So if I've got a kid that's 10 years old, that is not in the fourth grade, the world's not going to end. It's just simply not going to end. I want that child comfortable enough, especially down in those lower years. I want that child comfortable enough to be able to do what's asked of him or her by the teacher in the classroom. The curriculum and other skills that are being mastered, that child needs to be able to master those skills before we ask that child to master higher skills. And that's one of the greatest trauma. It's something we don't talk about. We don't talk about it. So a kid will go out and do something else well, and completely drop what they're not doing well at, because they want to be seen as doing something well. Mm-hmm. And we don't want that. We want a well-rounded child. Another place that kids are traumatized is kids don't like to be embarrassed. Now, I've been embarrassing children that belong to me all my life, and I enjoy it. But that's not the kind of embarrassing I'm talking about. Kids don't like to be reprimanded in front of their peers. Adults don't like to be reprimanded in front of their peers. So let's just say nobody does, but especially not on the school ground. Let's not cause any trauma on the school ground because I didn't make up my bed this morning and then you you decide you're gonna go come and get me out of class and spank me for that. Not good. Not good at all. Trauma, and again, that whole term, that's an impact, that's a physical or mental impact that is adversely placed on somebody that may last past that moment. That's trauma. So we've got to make sure that what we do is never intentionally traumatize the child, especially in public. And children, shame is one of a child's biggest of things to avoid. They don't want to be made ashamed in front of their peers. So let's respect that. And that's not a discipline tool. I'm gonna do this in front of your friends. That's not a discipline tool. That's trauma. And the sooner I'm glad, Dr. Shaw, I'm glad we're having this. The more we talk about what trauma is, I'm praying that the more parents get to understand, ooh, I shouldn't do that. I'm glad he said that. I'm glad she said that. I didn't know that. So I'm glad I'm watching the show. I'm listening to the show. Think about the things that you want to do that will be corrective measures for your child, and then think about where you're doing them. And let's not do it in front of Junior's friends or in front of Sally's friends. It's just not the right place to do it.
So
Same for teachers.
what would you say the trauma-informed environment or classroom would look like? What does it look like? What kinds of things would we have in place?
A lower teacher-pupil ratio to start. Absolutely. I public education has been what it's been for as long as it's been public education. I'm not knocking it. I'm a product of it. But when we give a teacher more than she can handle, and 35 kids in a classroom, it's more than she can handle or he can handle. So and then they don't have, with that much pressure on a teacher or an instructor, they don't have time to pick up the small nuances of a kid cutting up and why that kid's cutting up. So they may just, I hate the word suspension, but we know why we do it. Kid cut up. I have my back to the kid because I'm on the board trying to get, make sure all 35 of these kids understand algebra. All I hear is some cutting up from an area I'm used to hearing something cut up from. So this is the last time I'm going to take this. So Leon, get out of this class and go see Mr. Stone in the office. And Mr. Stone's going to say, you've been down here 3 times this month. Boom. That's going to be a suspension. So if we set ourselves up to fail, what's going to happen? We're going to fail more times than not. And I get tired. I did budgets. I was the administrator, deputy administrator in the county commission for many years, almost 10 years. So I saw 10 budgets. I saw 11 budgets come through the office to be approved. The school budget is always the biggest one. It's about $1 billion a year, and that breaks down to about $10,000 annually per child out of that $1 billion for education. To put a child in juvenile correction is $185,000 a year. Which would you rather spend? Just that simple. So we need. I know our legislators focus on doing what they have to do. And you can't keep throwing money at education. Yes, you can. If you can throw $184,000 at corrections per day, per year per child, you can certainly throw $20,000 at education per year per child. So we got to get to a point where we value education for what it is, and it's the fix. It's not the problem. It's the things that fix the problems that our children have. So let's train our teachers to recognize and to be cognizant of the fact that it's their job to recognize trauma in children, first and foremost, and let's pay them enough money after we train them to be able to recognize and want to recognize. And then there's another teacher when they've got that's in the classroom or teaching assistant that can go along and take the class on to the next level of what they're studying while we deal with this trauma in this child. If we keep ignoring this, it doesn't go away. They don't come to 616 Adams Juvenile Court anymore. Eventually, they'll end up at 201 Papa. And then out on Sycamore View or Nashville, Tennessee, or one of the many Department of Corrections across the state of Tennessee or outside our state. So if you put the money where it goes, Dr. Shaw, first, then trauma is able to be recognized and dealt with efficiently before it becomes criminal activity and other bad things that cost us much more money on the back end.
What would you say the benefits of being trauma informed in the juvenile justice system would be, or even the challenges of having that?
What it's been for us is a learning experience. We have had more people to have to go through training to get up to the trauma informed level. There's two different levels. There's 16 hours of trauma informed training that everybody in this building has had. For that amount of training, you're just trauma informed. You know how to spot problems with the kids and what they're dealing with. So if you're a counselor or whatever you are that's hands-on, you know how to spot it. If you're spotting it, then I got to train you how to deal with it, don't I? So we spent another nice amount of money. I don't know the exact amount figure, but on 20 more hours of trauma responsive training. We're still dealing with the UT Health Science Center, and we're still dealing with University of Memphis to help us along those lines. What does that do? That allows counselors that are meeting with children and their parents to write efficient reports about what they found because they know what they were looking for. So when a lawyer gets that report, or when a magistrate judge gets that report, then they know that, wow, when Johnny was 12, Johnny was homeless. Homelessness is trauma. They were living in their car until Johnny turned 13. Well, then we know why Johnny has this problem. So when we can focus on the source of what ails us, then we can focus on the cure. Right now, we're going through COVID-19. Everything that doctors are looking for is the source of the spread. That's our big, which is why we're doing this on video now, because we're hunkered down. We're isolating ourselves so that we don't catch the spread or become a part of the spread so that we can isolate where it comes from. And then once we isolate it, we treat it. Trauma is no different. It's not airborne, thank God, but it's no different. And we got to make sure that when a child is acting out, especially little children, the younger you catch anything, the easier it is to treat. When a kid's acting out, we got to find out the reason that child is acting out. He's not just trying to get on your nerves. We have a term here at juvenile court. Police SROs, the police that are in the schools, used to just bring kids down here for POA charge. They were pissing off an adult. And when you get tired of the kid, boom, we'll take him down there. You take him on her. No, that's not the solution. Let's find out why Johnny won't sit down and read his book and do what you want him to do in the classroom. Has he eaten today? I mean, I've been through this in the show. Let's just be more mindful of the fact that there's a reason behind the behavior. And finding that the reason behind the behavior is trauma informed and trauma responsive. And anything less than that, we're cheating our children.
I think it's really important to distinguish between those two, and I'm glad, and you've done a really good job of that. It's one thing to be informed, but are you really putting it into action. Speaking of the University of Tennessee Health Science Center and children and trauma, they are going to be sponsoring a Children's Mental Health Awareness Week starting
Yes.
May 3rd through 9th. And there are going to be some really good virtual activities for youth. It is going to be absolutely amazing. Cindy at the UT Health Science Center has done a great job of kind of pulling this together. She and Keena Vassar. So I'm gonna post this on the Facebook page for the Doctor to Doctor show and on my personal page, and hopefully you'll get that and pass it along as well, because it's
I've already added it to my page on Facebook.
yeah, yeah,
Absolutely.
going to be some great activities. So let's talk about the psychological trauma and PTSD and how they affect youth and families. Speak to that a little bit for me.
The PTSD, I'll start there. Post traumatic stress disorder, stress disorder, is what happens after the trauma. What happens after the trauma? And that's very important, because if it were loud noises like gunshots that kept a kid up all night, and then it makes the kid cry, and somebody drops a stack of books or something and makes a gun-like sound in a classroom, and that kid gets up and acts and has a fit as a result of that, then what the teacher, what the person in charge of the classroom needed to know was that this child had the problem with not being able to sleep for gunshots in the neighborhood, that he has a PTSD, that she has a PTSD. We can't, so that information needs to get to the hands of where it needs to go. When we look at the number of kids who live in the kinds of neighborhoods where gunshots are, especially in our public schools, unfortunately, where gunshots are commonplace, doesn't mean the kids got used to that yet. Just because you can keep on driving like nothing happened or keep on walking like nothing happened, children are traumatized by things that they won't admit to because they don't want to look like they're soft. We live in an era now where the tougher you are, the better you are. And some of the parenting even speaks to that. No, you can't be soft, you got to be tough. So kids keep their mouths shut about that. But PTSDs are real. So when you see kids react or respond in different ways to things that normal people just go, ooh, then you know that's a PTSD. And looking into PTSD is a real part of the ACEs test. The ACEs test is going to, Adverse Childhood Experiences test, is going to identify that that kid has had these kinds of things in his life that have occurred that may come back up and represent themselves in any kind of way. And I tell you, some of the ways that they present go to fight or flight. Some of them go to loud outbursts. Some of them even go to physical violence. So if we're aware that the PTSD exists in the child and that these things may be triggers, we can be prepared to deal with those things. If we're not aware, we can't. Testing is important. I know testing is a bad word in education because it seems like all we do now is test. I know it. Test this, test that. Standardized test, pop quiz. But when it comes to mental health, these are not tests that you can pass or fail. These are tests that you can only pass.
Take,
After that.
take a minute or so and just talk a little bit why youth that are involved in juvenile justice would be especially at risk for trauma.
Psychological trauma. Psychological trauma is when you think something that is abnormal, I mean, that everybody else would think is abnormal, is cool for you. That's psychological trauma. You have had a transformation in your thinking process and in your psyche that your thought process now treats being arrested as a badge of honor instead of something that should never, ever happen to you. It is very unfortunate, but I must tell the truth about this. We have far too many repeat offenders on charges that are bordering on things that adults do. Possession of a weapon. It is illegal for a child to have a gun. But I have kids that have done this more than multiple times. They didn't shoot anybody. They just like carrying guns around because it makes them look big time. That's and that's the psychological trauma. I need a gun to be safe. Psychological trauma. It's environmentally transmitted. All the big guys around me got guns. It's just like why my pants are hanging off my butt. All the guys I hang out with that I look up to wear their pants like this. Psychological. When you change a child's mind to thinking right is wrong and vice versa, that's my definition for psychological trauma. Far too many times, we have the wrong influences hanging out around our children. Not our children hanging out around them, because it's our responsibility to keep our children away from them. So we have to correct the things that traumatize our children psychologically and make them think wrong is right and right is wrong. And how that works here, children get cold in front of magistrates that have their future for at least the next 6 months in their hands. So rather than being respectful and looking the judge in the face and saying, yes, ma'am, and yes, your honor, and no, ma'am, no, your honor, they decide to shoot off. I don't care. What about if I send you home? I don't care. But what about if I send you to the Department of Children's Services for the next 6 months? Do what you gotta do. Trauma, psychological trauma, has made this person think that being tough is better than being nice, even with their future on the line. It is very difficult. Our magistrates have been trained to overlook. They can look down at the report on the child's psychological report and understand why this child is doing this. It is not personally directed at them sitting on that bench with that black robe on. It's because that child has come to them out of that environment where they have been psychologically traumatized. And we deal with it every day.
So I was gonna, my last question was gonna be, what kinds of things do you guys have in place? But I think you just described one, But I do want you to give some final thoughts on the topic before we leave today.
Glad to. Children need to be children for the whole time they are thought of legally as children. When we put the pressure on a child to be an adult, the results are going to be negative. The results are going to be negative. Now, I'll get pushback on that. Some people say, Mr. Gray, this child grew up in that same environment and he turned out all right, went to college. It does happen. It absolutely does happen. Not everybody handles trauma the same. But the statistics will tell us that the greater number of children that are traumatized will not do well in adult life. It's about 58% not doing well as opposed to 42% doing well. So what you don't want to do is roll the dice on that. You can't roll the dice on that. That's your child. That's your children. Three things. From my experiences as a parent, as a youth leader at church, and as a person here at this juvenile court, three things that I think are very, very important. First and foremost, that when a child is in the formative learning years, that there is more time spent with that child than you spend doing anything in your life. That child needs to know its real name. That child needs to know what colors are. That child needs to know A, B, and C. That child needs to, through Z, that child needs to know how to count to 10 or 20 preferably. That child needs to know who other people are and that adults and children are different. And that this is what a child does and this is what an adult does. That has to come from home. That's stuff that parents do. Children need hope. Hope is hard to find. Church is a good place to go and find it. It's a wonderful place to find it. We have all kinds of programs for children at church. They can still play with basketballs and computers and video games and all that, but they find hope because they find love that may be missing in the home. And I'm not saying that parents don't love the children. I'm saying that they don't, that they may find some additional help in that parenting. And finally, here in the juvenile court, this is not the end of your life. When you're picked up for as a juvenile, as a teenager, and you're picked up for a delinquent act, this is a wake-up call. Now you can choose not to wake up and keep doing the behavior that you did that brought you here the first time, or you can choose to wake up and listen to all of the counseling we have in place and all the people that will be dealing with your problem that brought you here. And you can take advantage of every opportunity that we offer here and change that behavior, or you can choose not to change that behavior and we'll see you again. I spent a whole lot of time dealing with second time offenders because we didn't get to them the first time. And that hurts me because I think that we treat kids, we have such a wonderful staff of there are more master's degrees and PhDs in this building. And I'm not saying education is the only thing, but it is very important. They have been trained to deal with the problems we see. So in closing, I don't want to see kids at juvenile court, but more than that, if I do, I don't want to see them back. And the way to do that is to get them on a path of correction, get them some hope, and hopefully get parents in their lives to a level that the parenting becomes as primary as any of the other aspects of their education. That's all I got, Doc.
I just want to add to that. I think it's not enough to just expect, and I'm speaking from an educator's perspective, to expect our educators to be trauma informed if we are not doing a better job at number one, you know, addressing the needs of our children that have been traumatized. We got to address those needs because, we're talking about human beings that you're expecting to deal with these children all day long
Yes,
that have some
yes,
really unique special needs, right? And and to, as you said, maybe whether it's decreasing the ratio of teacher student ratio or whatever, but we've got to make sure that we address the needs of these children. Another thing I was going to say, you talked about parents loving their children. I think sometimes because there are so many parents that have experienced the trauma too, that maybe they haven't even learned how to love,
yes,
you know.
yes,
So we really got to do. Dr. Stewart talks all the time about having these wraparound services and resources for our communities, and I think we've got to do a better job at being holistically addressing the
yes.
things. The issues that we're having. I don't have to ask you if you're coming back because you're my friend, and you know about me, right?
You are absolutely correct, Doc. Anytime you need me, I will be glad to be on Dr. Doctor. Absolutely. Hopefully next time we get past this COVID and we can be in the studio again.
Absolutely, absolutely. And thank you so much. And I hope that our listening audience has gained a little more knowledge today about some topic that is very relevant and very important in our community. And we will see you guys next Saturday on another edition of Doctor to Doctor in the Chat Room on 94.7 FM.